The crystalline walls of the High Council chamber hummed with tension as Captain Zara Chen stepped through the towering doors. Her boots echoed against the polished floor, each footstep deliberate and measured. Behind her, something massive shifted in the shadows, but the council members couldn't quite see what was yet. Captain Chun. Counselor Vex's voice dripped with disdain. His purple skin glistened under the chamber's artificial lights. You stand accused of unauthorized contact with a Class 7 extinction species. How do you plead? Zara's lips curved into a smile that never reached her eyes. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I break one of your precious rules again? She clasped her hands behind her back, rocking slightly on her heels. Here I thought saving an entire species might earn me a medal, not a tribunal. The 12 council members exchanged glances. Counselor Thane, a being composed entirely of shifting geometric patterns, flickered with agitation. The Kalari were deemed beyond salvation. Their homeworld was already consumed by the stellar cascade. Protocol dictated we maintain quarantine boundaries. Protocol. Zara tasted the word like it was poison. Right, because protocols have never been wrong before. She paused, letting her words sink in. Tell me, counselors, when was the last time any of you actually stepped foot on a dying world? When did you last hold a child who was afraid of the dark because their sun was literally burning out? Behind her, something moved again, larger this time. The shadows seemed to breathe. Counselor Vex leaned forward, his 6 eyes narrowing. Your emotional attachments are exactly why humans should never have been granted guardian status. You lack the objectivity required for such decisions. Objectivity? Zara's laugh was sharp and bitter. Is that what we're calling cowardice now? She took another step forward. The council members instinctively leaned back. You want to know what qualifies me as a guardian? It's not my ship. It's not my weapons. It's not even my stubborn human refusal to follow stupid orders. The chamber fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Zara could feel 12 pairs of alien eyes studying her, waiting for her to justify her actions. Well, she'd give them justification, all right. I spent 3 standard weeks on Kalar Prime, she began, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of barely controlled fury. 3 weeks watching a civilization accept their doom because the mighty Galactic Council had already written them off. Their philosophers called it graceful surrender. Their poets composed final verses about embracing the cosmic inevitability. She moved to the center of the chamber, directly under the brightest lights. But you know what I found most interesting? The children didn't want to surrender gracefully. Funny how that works. Counselor Yif, whose crystalline form resonated with harmonic frequencies, chimed softly. The evacuation logistics were deemed impossible. 17 billion sentients with incompatible atmospheric requirements. The transport vessels would have taken decades to construct. Would have, could have, should have, Zara mocked. The eternal song of bureaucracy. She spread her arms wide. See, that's the difference between humans and the rest of you. When faced with impossible odds, we don't calculate probabilities. We don't form committees. We don't write reports about acceptable losses. Something in the shadows behind her definitely moved that time. A few council members craned their necks, trying to get a better look. We improvise, Zara continued. We adapt. We find a third option when everyone else insists there are only 2. Her expression grew distant for a moment. The Kalari were losing their homeworld, sure, but they weren't losing their people. Not on my watch. Counselor Vex's skin darkened to a deeper purple. Impossible. Even if you could evacuate them, there are no suitable worlds within jump space range. The nearest habitable system is 43 light years away. Zara's grin returned, wider this time. More predatory. Who said anything about finding them a world? The confusion rippled through the council like a wave. Geometric patterns shifted more rapidly. Crystal harmonics grew discordant. Even a usually stoic Counselor Orth's metallic features betrayed uncertainty. Captain, Counselor Thane's form stabilized slightly. What exactly did you do? I gave them what they really needed. Zara's voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing the council to strain to hear her. Not a new world. Something better. She paused, savoring the moment. I gave them me. The silence stretched until Counselor Yi finally spoke. Clarification required. Your statement lacks coherent meaning. Zara threw back her head and laughed, the sound echoing off the crystal walls. When she finally composed herself, her eyes were bright with mischief and something deeper, something dangerous. You want to know what qualifies me as a guardian? She repeated their original question. Fine, but you might want to hold on to something solid. She turned slightly and for the first time spoke over her shoulder into the shadows. Hey everyone, time to wake up. The council wants to meet you. The response was immediate and overwhelming. What the council members had taken for shifting shadows suddenly resolved into movement. Hundreds of forms stirred, stretched, and began to sit up. Small forms, medium forms, large forms, all distinctly Kalari, with their characteristic silver skin and luminous eyes. They were everywhere, covering every surface of Zara's back, her shoulders, even perched carefully on her arms. The smaller ones yawned and rubbed their eyes sleepily. The older ones looked around with curious expressions. A few of the youngest ones waved at the gaping council members. 17 billion was too many to evacuate, Zara said conversationally as more and more Kalari became visible. But you know what's funny about quantum compression technology? Size becomes relative. Counselor Vex's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. His 6 eyes were wide with shock. Oh, don't look so surprised, Zara chided. Humans have been miniaturizing things for centuries. We put entire computers and devices smaller than your smallest finger. It was just a matter of scaling up the concept. She gestured to the stirring multitude covering her body, or rather, scaling down. A small Kalari child, no bigger than Zara's thumb now, climbed up to her shoulder and whispered something in her ear. Zara nodded seriously. Little Kex here wants to know if you're the scary council people I told him about, she translated with obvious amusement. I assured them you're mostly harmless. Counselor Orth's metallic voice rang with disbelief. This is impossible. Quantum compression at this scale would require energy levels that would destabilize local space-time. Would it? Zara asked innocently. I guess I should have checked with the physics department before I did it. She shrugged, causing several hundred tiny Kalari to adjust their positions like passengers on a gentle ride. Good thing humans are too stupid to know what impossible. The small Kalari on her shoulder whispered again. This time, Zara's expression softened slightly. She says, thank you, Zara told the council. All of them do. They want me to tell you that they don't blame you for giving up on them. They understand that sometimes the math doesn't work out. Her voice hardened. They're more forgiving than I am. Counselor Thane's geometric patterns were spinning rapidly now. The energy requirements alone, how are you maintaining the compression field? Zara's smile turned mysterious. That's the beautiful part. I'm not maintaining anything. She tapped her chest. Turns out the human heart produces a very specific electromagnetic frequency when it's protecting something it loves. Who knew that would be the perfect resonance for quantum field stabilization? More Kalari were waking up now. Some were having quiet conversations among themselves. Others were pointing at the various council members and discussing their appearances in hushed, amazed tones. Despite their reduced size, their voices carried perfectly in the chamber's acoustics. This is why you don't understand guardianship, Zara continued, her voice growing stronger. You think it's about having the biggest ship or the most advanced weapons. You think it's about following protocols and maintaining order. She spread her arms carefully, mindful of her passengers. But real guardianship? That's about being willing to carry the weight of those who can't carry themselves. A slightly larger Kalari, about the size of Zara's palm, made his way down her arm and stood on her outstretched hand. He spoke in his musical language, his words clear and dignified despite his size. Elder Miran says he wants to address the council directly, Zara translated. She lifted her hand closer to her face, so she could hear him better, then nodded. He says his people have chosen their guardian, and they're satisfied with their choice. He also says, she paused, listened, and then grinned wickedly. He says if you have a problem with their decision, you're welcome to try and evict them. The small elder's luminous eyes flashed with defiance as he stared down the massive council members. Despite being no larger than a child's toy, his presence filled the chamber. Counselor Vex finally found his voice. This changes everything. The implications, the precedent. The precedent, Zara interrupted, is that sometimes the right thing to do is also the impossible thing to do. And sometimes, she looked around at all 12 council members, making sure each one met her gaze, the impossible thing is exactly what humans do best. A tiny Kalari child tumbled down from her shoulder, laughing as she slid down Zara's arm like it was a playground slide. Another group had formed what looked like a miniature dance circle on her forearm, their movements synchronized and graceful. They're not refugees anymore, Zara observed, watching her living passengers with obvious affection. They're not displaced persons or extinction survivors. They're just my people, and I'm theirs. She looked back at the council. That's what qualifies me as a guardian. Not because some committee decided I was worthy, but because 17 billion lives decided I was home. The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. Not the heavy silence of judgment, but the contemplative quiet of minds being fundamentally changed. Finally, Counselia spoke, her crystal form resonating with a pure, clear tone. What do you intend to do now, Captain Chen? Zara's smile was radiant. Now we go exploring. The galaxy's a big place, and my family here has never seen most of it. She paused, considering. Plus, I hear there's a whole bunch of other impossible situations out there that could use a guardian's attention. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Oh, and counsel? Next time you want to question my qualifications? Several hundred tiny voices joined her in a chorus of laughter. Remember that the best guardians aren't the ones who follow your rules. They're the ones who make their own. As she walked toward the chamber doors, the sound of 17 billion small voices whispering, "Thank you," in perfect harmony, followed her out into the corridor. The council sat in stunned silence long after the doors had closed. 3 months later, the emergency klaxons were screaming across the Nexus station when Captain Zara Chen's ship, the Wanderer, docked at Bay 12. Station Commander Krell was waiting for her, his forearms gesticulating wildly as she disembarked. "Thank the void you're here." Krell's translated voice crackled through his breathing apparatus. "We got a situation that's completely outside normal protocols." Zara raised an eyebrow, adjusting her jacket as thousands of tiny forms shifted subtly across her back and shoulders. "Let me guess. Another impossible rescue that somehow became my problem." "The Nexury system," Krell began, his pace quickening as they walked through the station's corridors. 12 worlds, 43 billion inhabitants. They're dealing with something we've never seen before. Plague? Stellar collapse? Interdimensional invasion? Zara's tone was casual, but her passengers had gone very still. They always did when serious business was at hand. Worse. Krell's voice dropped. "They're being hunted." That got Zara's full attention. She stopped walking. Hunted by what? "That's just it. We don't know." Krell pulled up a holographic display from his wrist device. 3 weeks ago, ships started disappearing from their outer colonies. Not destroyed, not captured. Disappeared. No trace, no debris, no distress signals. The display showed a star map of the Nexury system. Red marks indicated the vanished colonies. There were too many red marks. The pattern's moving inward, Krell continued. Whatever's doing this, it's methodical, systematic, and it's heading straight for their core worlds. A tiny voice whispered near Zara's ear. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Little Ava wants to know if the Nexury have tried fighting back." Zara translated. Krell's 4 eyes blinked in surprise. How did she never mind? Yes, they tried. Fleet engagements, orbital defense platforms, everything. The attackers don't seem to care about their weapons. Ships just vanish, along with anyone who tries to help them. They resumed walking, passing through a crowded marketplace where dozens of species conducted trade. Zara noticed how many of them stopped to stare. Were the Guardian, who carried an entire civilization on her back, had spread quickly through the galaxy. So, what makes you think I could do anything about invisible ship stealers? Zara asked, because Krell's voice carried a hint of desperation. You're the only Guardian who's ever made the impossible possible. And because he hesitated. Because the Nexery specifically asked for you. They asked for me? Zara's eyebrows shot up. By name? Not just by name. They said, and I quote, "Send us the Guardian who carries the stars on her shoulders." Krell gestured toward her back, where hundreds of tiny Kalari were barely visible against her clothing. "I think they understand what you really are better than the rest of us do." A cluster of small voices whispered rapidly near her ear. Zara listened, then grinned. "The consensus is unanimous," she announced. "We're in." 2 days later, the Wanderer emerged from jump space at the edge of the Nexery system. Zara stood on her bridge, studying the sensor readings with growing unease. Her crew, a mix of species who had volunteered to serve aboard a ship carrying 17 billion passengers, worked quietly at their stations. Captain, her tactical officer, a Zenda named Rook, looked up from his console. "I'm reading massive displacement fields throughout the system. Whatever's been taking these ships, it's still here. Multiple contacts," added Navigator Walsh, one of the few other humans on her crew. "They're not showing up on conventional sensors, but the gravitational disturbances are enormous." Zara felt her Kalari passengers stir with interest. Several of the scientists among them were having animated discussions about the sensor data. "Professor Quinn has a theory," Zara said, listening to the rapid chittering near her shoulder. "She thinks we're dealing with entities that exist partially outside normal space-time. That's why conventional sensors can't lock onto them." "How does that help us fight them?" Rook's tentacles twitched with nervous energy. Before Zara could answer, the space in front of them simply opened, not like a doorway or a portal, but as if reality had decided to step aside for a moment. Something vast and impossible slid through the gap. "Holy void," Walsh whispered. The thing was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It looked like a cross between a jellyfish and a star, with flowing tentacles of pure energy trailing behind a crystalline core that pulsed with inner light. It was also roughly the size of a small moon. "Incoming transmission." Communications officer Zen announced, her scaled hands dancing over her console. "It's coming from the entity. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was like the sound of solar wind given speech. "Ancient, vast, and utterly alien. Guardian vessel. You carry the songs of the small singers. We hear them. We remember them." Zara's blood ran cold. Several of her Kalari passengers were trembling now. "You're the ones who've been taking the Nexery ships," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We are the collectors. We preserve. We remember. The small singers know this." A dozen tiny voices whispered urgently in her ear. Elder Miran climbed down to her shoulder, his luminous eyes filled with old pain. He says Zara's voice caught slightly. He says his people have met the collectors before, a long time ago, before they came to Kalar Prime. "Tell us, Guardian," the vast voice continued. "Why do you protect the small singers? Why do you carry their songs when they could be preserved in crystal perfection for all time?" The bridge fell silent. Even the ship system seemed to quiet, as if waiting for her answer. Zara took a deep breath. "Because songs aren't meant to be preserved. They're meant to be sung." The crystalline entity pulsed brighter. "Explain. You collect civilizations, don't you?" Zara began walking closer to the view screen. "You take them at their moment of greatest need and preserve them forever. Perfect. Unchanging. Safe. Yes. We save them from entropy, from death, from the cruel mathematics of time." Zara felt a familiar anger building in her chest. "And in doing so, you kill them completely." The entity's light flickered. Around the ship, space began to warp as more collectors emerged from their dimensional folds. "You think you're preserving life," Zara continued, her voice growing stronger. "But life isn't a museum piece. It's not a perfect crystal to be admired from afar. Life is messy. It's chaotic. It makes mistakes and learns from them. It grows, it changes, it surprises itself." Her Kalari passengers were moving now, climbing up to better positions on her shoulders and arms. They wanted to be seen. The Kalari could have been preserved on their dying world, she said. Frozen in crystal, perfect and unchanging forever. But they chose something else. They chose to live. Their world died regardless. The collector's voice was like the grinding of tectonic plates. Your intervention merely delayed the inevitable. Did it? Zara smiled, and it was fierce and proud. Really? Because from where I'm standing, they look pretty alive to me. She stepped directly under the bridge's brightest lights. Immediately, hundreds of tiny Kalari became visible, covering her arms, shoulders, and back like living jewelry. They move with purpose now, forming patterns and configurations across her body. They're not the same people who lived on Kala Prime. Zara explained as her passengers organized themselves into what looked like a living constellation. They've grown. They've changed. They've learned things about themselves they never could have discovered if they'd stayed preserved in crystal. The Kalari on her left arm had arranged themselves into the shape of a spiral galaxy. Those on her right arm formed a complex mathematical pattern that pulsed with its own rhythm across her shoulders and back. Thousands more creative flowing designs that shifted and evolved even as the collectors watched. Look at them, Zara said softly. Really look. This isn't preservation. This is evolution in real time. Elder Miran stood on her shoulder and began to sing. His voice was tiny but pure, and immediately others joined him. Within moments, 17 billion voices were harmonizing in perfect unity, their song filling the bridge and somehow extending through space itself. The lead collector's crystalline core flared brighter. The song is different. It has changed since we last heard it. Of course it has, Zara laughed. It's alive. It's supposed to change. More collectors emerged from dimensional folds until the Wanderer was surrounded by dozens of the massive entities. But instead of attacking, they simply listened to the song of 17 billion tiny voices carried on the shoulders of one stubborn human. You would risk their destruction rather than accept their preservation? The lead collector asked. I would risk everything rather than see them become museum exhibits, Zara replied without hesitation. Because the moment you preserve something forever, it stops being what it was. It becomes just a memory of what it used to be. The singing continued, growing more complex as different groups of Kalari added their own harmonies and variations. It was the same song they'd sung on their dying world, but it was also completely new. It had absorbed their experiences, their travels, their growth. The song has learned, another collector observed, its voice filled with something that might have been wonder. They all have, Zara agreed, and so have I. That's what happens when you choose to live instead of simply exist. The space around them shimmered as the collectors conferred in ways beyond human comprehension. Finally, the lead entity spoke again. The Nexary worlds. You would protect them as you protect the small singers. If they want my protection, yes. Even knowing that they will change, that they will become something other than what they are now. Zara grinned, especially knowing that. The collector was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice had changed subtly. It sounded younger somehow. We have preserved for so long. We have forgotten the beauty of impermanence. The small singer's song reminds us of what we once knew. And what's that? Zara asked. That the most precious things in the universe are not the ones that last forever, but the ones that shine brightly and then transform into something new. The massive entities began to fade, retreating back into their dimensional folds. But before they vanished completely, the lead collector spoke one final time. Guardian, you carry more than the small singers on your shoulders. You carry the future itself. Protect it well. And then they were gone, leaving only empty space and the gentle song of 17 billion voices expressing gratitude in harmonious chorus. Later, as the Wanderer docked at Nexary Prime to deliver news of their salvation, Zara stood in her quarters looking out at the stars. Her Kalari passengers had settled in for the night, but a few of the younger ones were still active, playing games among the folds of her clothing. Captain, it was Rook's voice over the intercom. The Nexary government is asking what they owe you for this service. Zara smiled, feeling the gentle weight of 17 billion lives trusting her with their future. Tell them, she said, that the debt is already paid. They chose to live instead of merely existing. That's payment enough for any guardian worth the title. As she prepared for sleep, Elder Miran climbed up to her ear one last time. He says, she whispered to herself, translating his musical words, that home isn't a place you find. It's a choice you make every day. Outside her window, the stars continue their ancient dance, and somewhere among them, other impossible situations waited for a guardian crazy enough to carry the universe on her shoulders.